The whispers started at my wedding. I could hear them between the clinks of champagne glasses and forced laughter. Gold digger, trophy wife, daddy issues. I'm Layla, and at 32, I married the love of my life, who happened to be 35 years my senior. The judgment in people's eyes burned, but Charles' warm hand in mine was all that mattered. Did you see her dress? Probably cost more than my car. I overheard Harvey mutter to Sterling during our garden party 6 months later. The brothers huddled near the fountain, pretending to admire the roses Charles and I had planted together. Dad's lost his mind, Riker chimed in, swirling his whiskey. She's barely older than us. I busied myself arranging appetizers, pretending not to notice. Charles appeared behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. They'll come around, my dear, he whispered, but his voice carried the same wheeze that had been worrying me for weeks. Charles, maybe you should sit down. You're looking pale. I guided him to a nearby chair, earning eye rolls from his sons. Playing nurse already? Riker approached, his designer shoes crushing our freshly laid mulch. Practicing for when he's bedridden? That's enough. Charles's voice, though weakened, still commanded respect. Layla is my wife, and you will treat her accordingly. The party continued with artificial pleasantries, but I couldn't shake the chill of Riker's words. Later that evening, I found Charles in his study, reviewing documents with Patricia, his lawyer and longtime friend. Everything's in order, Patricia assured him, catching my eye with a knowing smile. The video recording is complete, and the papers are filed. Video recording? I asked, setting down Charles' evening tea. Charles reached for my hand. Just ensuring our future is secure, my love. You know how particular I am about details. A coughing fit seized him, and I rushed to his side with water. Through the study's window, I spotted Riker and Harvey in intense conversation by their cars, heads bent together like conspirators. I don't trust them, Yvonne, my best friend, said later that night over the phone. The way they look at you, Layla, it's predatory. Charles trusts me, I replied, watching him sleep peacefully beside me. That's all that matters. But the next morning, I discovered a printed email in Charles's printer tray. It was from Riker to his brothers. We need to act soon. Dad's health is declining faster than expected. That little gold digger won't know what hit her. My hands trembled as I read it. Charles stirred in his sleep, and I quickly tucked the email into my drawer. The man I loved was dying. I could see it in his increasingly fragile movements, hear it in his labored breathing. His sons were circling like vultures, but I wouldn't let them destroy what we had built. I made an appointment with Dr. Matthews, I told Charles over breakfast. Your cough is getting worse. Ha, always taking care of me, he smiled, reaching across the table. His hand trembled slightly. That's why I fell in love with you, Layla. Your heart. Sterling appeared in the doorway, his expression darkening at our intimate moment. The board meeting starts in an hour, Dad, if you're feeling up to it. Of course. Charles stood, swaying slightly. I steadied him, earning a glare from Sterling. I can drive you, I offered. He doesn't need a babysitter, Sterling snapped. No, but I'd like my wife's company. Charles kissed my cheek, and we left Sterling seething in the doorway. In the car, Charles's breathing grew more labored. Promise me something, he said, taking my hand. Promise you'll stay strong, no matter what happens. Charles, don't. Promise me, Layla. They'll try to break you, but you're stronger than they know. Patricia has everything ready. I squeezed his hand, fighting back tears. I promise. That evening, I overheard the brothers in Charles's study. The will reading will be our chance, Harvey was saying. She won't see it coming. I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding. They were planning something, but what? Charles's words echoed in my mind. You're stronger than they know. Little did they realize, their father had prepared for this very moment. As I watched them leave the study, heads held high with unearned confidence, I thought about the video Patricia mentioned. Whatever storm was coming, I would weather it, not just for myself, but for the man who saw past the whispers and loved me for who I really was. The call came at 3:47 a.m. Charles had been struggling to breathe, and I'd finally convinced him to let me take him to the hospital. I held his hand as the machines beeped around us, their rhythm a countdown I wasn't ready to accept. "I love you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Remember what we discussed." Those were his last words. The flatline tone pierced the quiet room, and my world collapsed. I barely registered the nurses rushing in or being guided to the hallway. My husband was gone. "Well, isn't this convenient?" Riker's voice cut through my grief hours later. He stood in the hospital corridor, Harvey and Sterling flanking him like bodyguards. Alone with him when it happened. "Don't you dare," I warned, my voice raw from crying. "Don't you dare make this about money right now." "Everything's about money with you, isn't it?" Sterling sneered. Patricia arrived before I could respond, her heels clicking purposefully down the hallway. "Boys, this is hardly the time or place. Your father just passed away." "Our father," Harvey emphasized, whom she manipulated until his dying breath. 3 days later, we gathered at the house for what was supposed to be a family dinner before the funeral. The tension could have been cut with a knife. "When's the will reading?" Riker demanded, stabbing at his untouched steak. "Your father's body isn't even cold," Patricia responded sharply. She'd stayed close since Charles's death, a buffer between me and the brothers' increasing hostility. "We have a right to know our inheritance," Harvey insisted, especially given the circumstances of his marriage. I set down my fork. The circumstances being that I loved him? "Oh, please," Sterling laughed coldly. "You loved his bank account. We all know it. The question is, how much did you manage to squeeze out of him before the end?" "That's enough." My brother Micah stood up so quickly, his chair toppled backward. "My sister just lost her husband. Show some respect." "Respect?" Riker scoffed. "Like she showed respect marrying our father when she's barely older than us?" I pushed away from the table, my hands shaking. In Charles' study, I found myself drawn to his desk. The familiar scent of his cologne still lingered. Opening the top drawer, I found an envelope with my name written in his distinctive handwriting. "Finding more assets to claim?" Sterling's voice made me jump. He stood in the doorway, watching me with undisguised contempt. "Get out," I said quietly, clutching the envelope. "This is our father's house. You're the one who needs to get out." "Actually," Patricia appeared behind him, "this is still Layla's house, at least until the will reading. I suggest you remember that." After they left, I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single note. "My dearest Layla, when the storm comes, remember the video. Trust Patricia. All my love, Charles." The video. The one they'd recorded in the study. What had Charles planned? "They're going to try to take everything," Yvonne said later that night, sitting with me in the kitchen. "You know that, right?" "Let them try." I pulled out Charles's note. He knew this would happen. He prepared for it. "Mrs. Wright?" Our housekeeper appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Riker is in the garage, going through Mr. Charles's files." I found him rifling through cabinets, papers scattered everywhere. Looking for something? He didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "Just collecting what's mine." "Nothing is yours yet," I reminded him. "The will reading isn't until tomorrow." "You really think you've won, don't you?" He stepped closer, trying to intimidate me with his height. "Think you've secured your future by seducing an old man." "I loved your father," I said firmly. "Something you clearly know nothing about." "Love?" He laughed. "Tomorrow you'll learn what really matters in this family. And it isn't love." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept reading Charles's note, thinking about the video he'd mentioned. Whatever was on it had given him confidence in my future. But his sons were ruthless, determined to paint me as a gold digger who'd taken advantage of their father. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Everything's ready for tomorrow. Charles made sure you'd be protected. Get some rest." I touched the empty side of the bed, where Charles should have been. "I promise I won't let them win." I whispered to the darkness. Whatever you planned, I'll see it through. The will reading was set for 10 a.m. In less than 12 hours, I'd find out exactly what Charles had done to protect me from his son's greed. And something told me they weren't going to like it one bit. Patricia's office felt smaller, with all of us crammed inside. Riker lounged in a leather chair like he already owned the place, while Harvey and Sterling stood near the window, whispering. My brother Micah sat beside me, his presence steadying. Before we begin, Patricia said, arranging documents on her desk, there's a video message from Charles that he wanted played first. A video? Harvey straightened. That wasn't mentioned before. There's a lot you don't know, Patricia replied coolly, reaching for her laptop. Wait, Riker interrupted. We should have our lawyer present for this. Your father's instructions were explicit, Patricia said. Just family and myself. If you'd prefer to leave. Play it, I said quietly. My heart hammered against my ribs as Patricia connected her laptop to the wall-mounted screen. This is ridiculous, Sterling muttered. She probably coerced him into making this video when he wasn't thinking clearly. Your father was of sound mind until the end, Patricia snapped, as his medical records will attest. The screen flickered to life, and there was Charles, sitting in his study. He looked healthy in the video, recorded just 2 months ago. My throat tightened at the sight of him. If you're watching this, he began, I'm no longer with you, and I imagine my sons are already circling like sharks. Riker shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I've watched you boys, Charles continued. Watched how you've treated Layla from the day I introduced her. Your contempt, your assumptions, your cruel whispers when you thought I couldn't hear. But I heard everything. Harvey's face reddened. Sterling looked away. You see, I've made some decisions about my estate that you might not expect. Charles leaned forward in the video. But before that, let me tell you a story about your inheritance. What inheritance? Riker interrupted. Can we skip to the actual will? Quiet, Patricia commanded. On screen, Charles pulled out 3 folders. These contain records of every loan I've given each of you. Riker, your failed tech startups. Harvey, your gambling debts. Sterling, your string of bad investments. I covered everything, hoping you'd learn from your mistakes. You didn't. The brothers exchanged panicked looks. Instead, Charles continued, you directed your bitterness at Layla, convinced she was after my money. The irony isn't lost on me. My brother squeezed my hand as tears rolled down my cheeks. Now, about my estate. Charles opened another folder. Patricia, please distribute the documents. Patricia handed each brother a thick envelope. Their hands shook as they opened them. These are loan repayment schedules, Charles explained. Every penny I've given you over the years, with interest, due immediately upon my death. This is insane, Harvey exploded, papers scattering across the floor. He can't do this. He can, and he did, Patricia said calmly. Keep watching. Layla, Charles's voice softened. My love, open the locked drawer in my study desk. The key is with Patricia. Patricia handed me a small silver key. We can pause. No, I said firmly. Let it play. In that drawer, Charles continued, you'll find documentation of every charitable foundation I've established in your name. While my sons were borrowing millions, you were helping me plan homeless shelters and scholarship programs. That's the difference between greed and love. Riker stood up so fast, his chair toppled backward. This is fraud. She manipulated him. Sit down, Patricia ordered. We're not finished. As for my actual estate, Charles said, I've left specific instructions with Patricia. But know this, those who showed kindness will find kindness in return. Those who showed only greed, he shrugged. Well, karma has a way of balancing the scales. The video ended. Silence filled the room. This isn't over, Sterling threatened, pointing at me. We'll contest it. You're welcome to try, Patricia said, pulling out more documents. Your father made everything legally binding, including those loan repayments. You planned this, Harvey accused me. You turned him against us. No, I stood up, finding strength in Charles's recorded words. You did that all by yourselves. The estate details, Patricia continued over their protests, will be disclosed once Layla opens that drawer. Shall we head to the house? As we left Patricia's office, I caught Riker making a furious phone call, probably to his lawyer. Harvey looked shell-shocked, while Sterling kept rereading his loan documents in disbelief. You okay? Micah asked quietly as we walked to our cars. I nodded, clutching the small silver key. Charles knew exactly what he was doing. He protected me in the best way possible, by letting them reveal who they truly are. The drive back to the house felt like the calm before a storm. Whatever waited in that locked drawer, I knew one thing for certain. Charles had just turned his son's greed into their downfall. The study still smelled like Charles. Standing before his desk, memories flooded back. Late nights discussing charity projects, morning coffee while he read the paper, stolen kisses between meetings. The silver key felt heavy in my hand. Get on with it, Riker demanded from the doorway. His lawyer had arrived, a sharp-faced woman who kept checking her phone. This is a private moment, Micah stepped between us. Private? In our father's house? Sterling scoffed. Patricia cleared her throat. Actually, about that ownership claim. She pulled out another document. Charles transferred the house deed to Layla 3 months ago. He what? Harvey snatched the paper. This can't be legal. Completely legal, Patricia smiled. Now, shall we proceed? My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the drawer. Inside lay a leather portfolio and a USB drive labeled Watch Me First. Another video? Sterling groaned. How many recordings did he make? Patricia connected the USB to Charles's laptop. The screen flickered, showing Charles and me in this very study exactly 1 year ago. Is this recording? Charles asked someone off screen. Then to me, Layla, darling, tell me again about your idea for the women's shelter. I watched myself sit forward eagerly. The statistics show that financial dependency keeps women in dangerous situations. If we could provide not just housing, but job training, childcare. See how her eyes light up when discussing helping others? Charles turned to the camera. Not money, not status, just genuine desire to make a difference. Riker made a disgusted sound. Turn it off. This proves nothing. Keep watching, Patricia insisted. The video showed multiple clips spanning months. Me organizing fundraisers, visiting construction sites for the shelters, meeting with social workers. Charles narrating throughout, documenting my involvement in his charitable works. Why are we watching this? Harvey demanded. Because, Charles's voice grew stronger, this proves Layla's character. Every decision she helped make, every project she championed, was about helping others. While you three, he sighed. Well, let's review your contributions. The video shifted to security footage. Riker arguing with Charles about another failed startup. Harvey begging to cover gambling debts. Sterling demanding money for a sure-thing investment. Turn it off! Riker lunged for the laptop, but Micah blocked him. That's enough! The lawyer finally spoke up. This video seems deliberately edited to show the truth, Patricia finished. Now, Layla, the portfolio, please. Inside were detailed records of every charitable foundation Charles had established, with me listed as executive director. But there was more. Documentation of every loan his sons had taken, every failure they'd hidden, every scheme they'd attempted. Dad kept all this? Sterling whispered, face pale. Your father was meticulous, Patricia said. He knew exactly who you all were. Now, about the estate distribution. Wait, I interrupted, finding one last envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. My dearest Layla, I read aloud, my voice shaking. If they're watching, let them hear this. You never asked for my money. You asked for my love, my trust, my partnership in making the world better. That's why I'm leaving you not just the house, but control of all my charitable foundations. You'll continue the work we started together. Riker's lawyer was frantically flipping through papers. This can't be binding. Oh, but it is, Patricia smiled. As for you boys, your father left you each exactly $1, plus those loan repayment schedules, of course. $1? Harvey's legs gave out, and he sank into a chair. That's impossible. The rest, I continued reading, will fund the foundations we built together. And one new project, a support system for women falsely labeled as gold diggers, who genuinely love partners despite age differences. Because love, real love, isn't about money. It's about making the world better together. Sterling stormed out. Riker followed, dragging his useless lawyer along. Harvey just sat there, staring at nothing. Charles recorded everything, Patricia explained softly. Every cruel comment, every scheme they planned. He knew they'd try to paint you as a gold digger, so he spent the last year building an airtight case proving otherwise. I touched the screen where Charles's face was frozen, smiling at me. He knew them better than they knew themselves. The foundations are yours now, Patricia said. All of them. You're in charge of his entire charitable legacy. Harvey finally stood. This isn't over, he threatened weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I picked up the portfolio, it is. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. These foundations won't run themselves. As they left, I sat in Charles's chair, surrounded by evidence of our shared vision. He hadn't just protected me, he'd empowered me to continue our mission. And somehow, that felt like the greatest inheritance of all. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Riker's name flashed on the screen for the 20th time. You should answer it, Yvonne said, helping me sort through foundation documents. Get it over with. I picked up on the 21st ring. What? We need to talk. Riker's voice was strained. Face to face, all of us. There's nothing to discuss. 1 million each, he said quickly. That's our offer. We'll drop any legal challenges if you give us 1 million each from the foundation funds. I laughed. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. 2 million then. Come on, Layla, be reasonable. Meeting's in an hour, I said. Patricia's office. Bring your brothers. Patricia had coffee waiting when we arrived. The brothers looked terrible. Sterling's designer suit was wrinkled, Harvey's eyes were bloodshot, and Riker's usual arrogance had deflated into desperation. Before you start, I held up my hand. There's one last video you need to see. God, not another one, Sterling groaned. Patricia pressed play. Charles appeared on screen, looking directly into the camera. Boys, if you're watching this, you've already tried to negotiate with Layla. Let me be clear. Every foundation dollar is legally protected. Every attempt to contest will only drain your own resources. Harvey slumped in his chair. But here's what you don't know, Charles continued. Those loan repayment schedules? They're due in full by the end of this month. If you fail to pay, everything you own becomes collateral. Your homes, cars, investments. Everything. He can't do that, Riker whispered. We never signed. Actually, Patricia pulled out 3 documents. You did. Remember those investment contracts you signed last year? Read the fine print. Sterling grabbed the papers, face growing pale. This is insane! We'll be ruined! Unless, Charles said on screen, you agree to Layla's terms. I sat forward. Here's the deal. You publicly apologize for your treatment of me. Admit your assumptions were wrong. Then, you'll each work for one of the foundations, unpaid, for 1 year. After that, your debts will be forgiven. Work? For free? Harvey looked horrified. At a charity? Manual labor, I specified. Building houses, serving at shelters, actually helping people for once in your lives. And if we refuse? Riker challenged. Then I call in the loans tomorrow, I shrugged. Your choice. The brothers huddled in the corner, whispered arguments growing heated. Finally, Riker turned back. We need time to think. You have 1 hour, Patricia said. After that, I start the paperwork to seize your assets. They fled the office, leaving their coffee untouched. Think they'll do it? Yvonne asked after they left. They have no choice, Patricia smiled. Charles made sure of that. He knew money was the only language they understood. My phone buzzed. A text from Sterling. "This is cruel," I replied. "Crueler than calling me a gold digger at my husband's funeral?" 58 minutes later, they returned. Riker looked like he'd aged 10 years. "Fine," he spat. "We'll do it. But we want something in writing saying our debts will be cleared after the year." "Already prepared." Patricia handed them contracts. "Sign here." As they signed, I pulled out my phone. "One more thing. The public apology? You're doing it now. Live on my Instagram." "You're enjoying this," Harvey accused. "Actually, I'm not," I said quietly. "I wish you'd seen me as family, seen how much I loved your father. Maybe then things would be different." Sterling looked away, something like shame crossing his face. One by one, they recorded their apologies. Riker went first, stiff but sincere enough. Harvey mumbled through his. But Sterling surprised me. "I was wrong," he said, looking directly at the camera. "Layla loved our father in a way we never did. Selflessly, completely. We were the ones who saw him as a bank account. I'm sorry." After they left, Patricia squeezed my shoulder. "Charles would be proud." "Tomorrow," I said, checking my calendar, "Riker starts work at the women's shelter. Harvey gets the homeless outreach program, and Sterling," I smiled, "he'll be building houses in the summer heat." "Karma's a beautiful thing," Yvonne grinned. My phone buzzed with messages from their wives, their friends, their business associates, all reacting to the apology videos. The truth was finally out. That night, I sat in Charles's study, touching the frame of our wedding photo. "I did it," I whispered. "I made them see the truth. Not just about me, but about themselves. The foundations would continue. Lives would be changed. And 3 privileged men would learn the value of honest work and genuine service. It wasn't revenge. It was redemption. Just as Charles had planned all along. "You missed a spot," I said, watching Riker scrub the shelter's kitchen floor. His once manicured hands were red and raw from cleaning products. "This is humiliating," he muttered, dunking the brush back into the bucket. "More humiliating than trying to steal from charity?" Maria, the shelter's director, walked in with more cleaning supplies. "The bathroom needs attention next." It had been 2 weeks since the brothers started their mandatory community service. The transformation was slow but noticeable. My phone buzzed. A text from Harvey's supervisor at the homeless outreach program. "He actually showed up early today, still complaining, but he's learning." "Layla!" Sterling's voice called from outside. I walked out to find him shirtless, sweating under the summer sun, helping frame a new house. "Can we talk?" "Need a break already?" "No." He wiped his forehead. I met someone. The woman whose house we're building. Single mom, 3 kids, escaped an abusive marriage. She told me her story. I waited. Dad would have helped her, wouldn't he? Even before he met you? "Yes," I said softly. "He would have." "I never knew what these foundations actually did," Sterling admitted. "The real impact they have." Before I could respond, my phone rang. Patricia's number. "Turn on the news," she said without greeting. Now, inside the shelter's office, I flipped on the TV. A reporter stood outside our main foundation building. Sources claim the Wright brothers are contesting their father's will again, this time alleging video tampering and coercion. "What?" I spun to face Sterling. "Are you serious?" He looked genuinely shocked. "I didn't know about this. Must be Riker. He was meeting with lawyers last night." I stormed into the kitchen. Riker was gone. "He got a call and left 10 minutes ago," Maria reported. "Said it was an emergency." My phone exploded with notifications. Social media was already buzzing with the news, undoing all the progress from their public apologies. "Emergency foundation meeting," I texted Patricia. 1 hour. At the office, Harvey was waiting. "I had nothing to do with this," he said immediately. "The outreach program. It's changing how I see things. Save it, I snapped, just as Patricia arrived with a thick folder. Your brother, she said to Harvey, just made a huge mistake. Show them. She spread out documents across the conference table. Charles anticipated this. There's a clause in their contracts. Any legal challenge during their service year triggers immediate asset seizure. No warnings, no negotiations. Riker's going to lose everything, Harvey whispered. Unless you stop him, I said. Right now, Sterling burst in, still in his work clothes. I called his wife. She said he's meeting the lawyers at the courthouse in 20 minutes. Then what are we waiting for? Harvey grabbed his keys. We found Riker on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters. His lawyer was mid-speech about video manipulation and undue influence. Stop! Harvey's voice boomed across the plaza. Brother, you need to stop. Stay out of this, Riker hissed. Show him, I told Patricia. She handed Riker the clause documents. His face went from confident to terrified in seconds. It's not just you, Sterling said quietly. Think about Sarah, the kids. You'll lose everything. The foundations, Harvey added. They're actually helping people, Riker. Real people. Come back to the shelter. See for yourself. Reporters pressed closer, cameras rolling. Riker looked at his lawyer, then at me. If I drop this, you keep your assets, Patricia confirmed, but you finish your year of service. All of it. He closed his eyes, handed the papers back to his lawyer. Press conference canceled. No comment. The reporters groaned, but kept filming as Riker turned to me. I'm sorry, he said, loud enough for the cameras to catch. Again, for everything. Back at the shelter, Maria had him clean the bathrooms twice for disappearing. I watched him work, remembering Charles's words about redemption. Your father planned for everything, Patricia said, reviewing the contract clause. He knew Riker would try something like this. He knew his sons, I agreed, and he knew they needed this wake-up call. My phone buzzed. A message from the woman whose house Sterling was helping build. Your brother-in-law spent his lunch break playing catch with my kids. Whatever you're doing, it's working. That evening, I found Harvey sorting donations at the outreach center, long after his required hours. Why are you still here? I asked. He paused, holding a child's coat. Dad used to say money wasn't real wealth. I never understood that until now. I left him there, drove home to Charles, our house. In the study, I touched the photo of us on our wedding day. You were right, I whispered. Sometimes people need to lose everything to find what matters. The foundations would continue. And maybe, just maybe, 3 brothers would find their redemption in the process. 6 months into their service, the annual foundation gala arrived. I stood at the podium, surveying the crowd of donors and beneficiaries. Where's Riker? I whispered to Patricia. He was supposed to speak about his experience at the women's shelter. Running late, she checked her phone. Traffic. The doors burst open. Riker rushed in, but he wasn't alone. Sarah, one of the shelter residents he'd been working with, followed with her 2 small children. Sorry, he panted, reaching the stage. Sarah's babysitter canceled. I couldn't let her miss this. I blinked in surprise. The Riker I'd known 6 months ago wouldn't have cared. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed the crowd, tonight we celebrate not just our foundation's achievements, but the power of transformation. I'd like to introduce Riker, who has a story to share. He approached the microphone, straightening his tie. 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything about wealth. I was wrong. His voice cracked. True wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in the smile of a domestic violence survivor when she gets her first apartment. It's in her children feeling safe for the first time in years. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, hugging her kids closer. My father knew this, Riker continued. He tried to teach us, but we were too blind to see, until now. Harvey stood up from his table. May I? He gestured to the microphone. Last week, Harvey said, taking the stage, a homeless veteran I've been working with got a job. When he told me, he hugged me and cried. Me, the guy who used to spend his father's money at casinos. That hug was worth more than any jackpot. Sterling joined them, still wearing his construction site boots. The house we finished today, it's for a family of 5 who've been living in their car. The youngest daughter asked if she could paint her room purple. He smiled. So I stayed late to help her do it. The crowd was silent, captivated. Our father, Riker's voice strengthened, married a woman who understood what he'd known all along, that true legacy isn't measured in dollars. Layla, he turned to me, we were wrong about you, completely wrong. Suddenly, Patricia rushed to the stage, whispering urgently in my ear. The lawyers found something in Charles' private vault. You need to see this now. In a back room, she played a video on her tablet. Charles appeared, looking frail but determined. If you're watching this, he said, my sons have completed at least 6 months of service. Patricia, show them the final document. She pulled out an envelope. Inside was a new will addendum. If they prove genuine change, Charles continued, if they demonstrate true understanding of our mission, they each receive a trust, not for themselves, but to establish their own charitable foundations. The brothers stared at the document in shock. Dad set this up? Sterling whispered. He never gave up on you, I said. He believed you could change. There's more. Patricia pointed to the screen. Layla, Charles smiled warmly, you'll oversee these trusts. Guide them. You've always understood what matters most. Help my sons understand, too. Riker grabbed my arm. Sarah's housing application. Could my foundation? The Veteran Employment Program, Harvey interrupted. I have ideas. Wait, I held up my hands. You have to complete the full year first. Prove this change is real. It is real, Sterling said quietly. That little girl's purple room? I'm going back tomorrow to help her decorate. Back in the gala, Sarah took the microphone. 6 months ago, I was terrified of men in suits. Then I met Riker, scrubbing toilets at the shelter. The crowd chuckled. He taught my son to tie his shoes, helped my daughter with homework. Small things that meant everything. Other beneficiaries stood up, sharing stories. The homeless veteran Harvey helped. The family moving into Sterling's latest house project. Charles Wright's legacy, Patricia addressed the crowd, isn't just in buildings or programs. It's in the transformation of his own family. Later that night, I found Riker in the shelter's playroom, reading a story to Sarah's kids. Harvey was planning a job fair with his veteran friends. Sterling had blueprints spread out, designing a playground for his next housing project. My phone buzzed, a message from Yvonne. Charles would be so proud right now. I watched the brothers, remembering Charles's words about karma and consequences. But this wasn't the karma of punishment. It was the karma of transformation. Dad knew exactly what he was doing, Sterling said, joining me. The money was never the real inheritance. No, I agreed. The real inheritance was this, the chance to become who you were meant to be. Outside, the city lights twinkled. Somewhere out there, more lives waited to be changed. And now, instead of 3 enemies, I had 3 partners in continuing Charles's true legacy. The final day of their mandatory service arrived with little fanfare. I found the brothers already at work. Riker organizing a job fair at the shelter, Harvey coordinating veteran housing placements, and Sterling supervising the completion of his 10th house. Ready for the final foundation meeting? Patricia asked, carrying a stack of folders into Charles's study. Almost. I touched the wedding photo on the desk. Just need to get something first. In the vault, behind Charles's old files, sat a small wooden box I'd never opened. Inside was a letter dated for this exact day, along with 3 identical envelopes. The brothers arrived looking different than they had a year ago. Gone were the designer suits and arrogant sneers. Riker's hands were calloused from honest work. Harvey's eyes held genuine compassion, and Sterling carried paint swatches for his next project. Before we discuss your trusts, I placed the envelopes before them. Your father left these for today. They opened them simultaneously. Inside each was a photo, Charles holding them as babies, along with handwritten notes. My son, Riker read aloud, voice catching. Today you understand what I've always known. True wealth lies in what you give, not what you take. Harvey wiped his eyes. I never stopped believing in you, even when you lost your way. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become, Sterling finished, hands shaking. Now, Patricia spread out the trust documents. Let's talk about your foundations. Actually, Riker interrupted, we have something to say first. He nodded to his brothers. Sarah's starting a counseling program for abuse survivors. I want my foundation to fund scholarships for women rebuilding their lives. Harvey leaned forward. The veterans taught me about brotherhood, loyalty. My foundation will focus on military families, helping them transition to civilian life. And mine, Sterling added, will partner with local schools. Kids need safe spaces to play, to learn, to grow. We're starting with that purple playground, but thinking bigger. I studied their faces, seeing Charles in each of them. You've really changed, because you showed us how, Riker said, by choosing love over vengeance when you had every right to destroy us. The foundations are just the beginning, Harvey added. We're selling our luxury cars, downsizing our homes. The money will do more good in the community. Sterling pulled out his phone. Remember that viral video of us apologizing? It hit 1 million views today. But look at the comments. I scrolled through. Inspired me to volunteer. Started helping at my local shelter. Changed how I judge people. Your story reached people, Patricia smiled. Changed perspectives about age gap relationships, about redemption, about what really matters. Charles knew, I said softly. He knew this would happen. Not exactly, a familiar voice called from the doorway. Maria from the shelter entered, followed by Sarah, the veteran Harvey helped, and the family moving into Sterling's latest house. We all had a hand in this transformation. The real inheritance, Riker stood, hugging Sarah, was the chance to become better people. To understand what Dad and Layla had, Harvey added, shaking his veteran friend's hand. To build something meaningful. Sterling lifted the little girl who'd wanted the purple room. Patricia handed me one final document, the official transfer of trust powers. But instead of signing immediately, I looked at the brothers. Charles believed in second chances, I said. Prove him right. We will, they answered in unison. As everyone filed out, I stayed behind in the study. The wedding photo caught the late afternoon light, and for a moment, I swore Charles was smiling differently. You planned it all, I whispered. The video evidence, the service requirement, the delayed trusts. You knew revenge wouldn't heal them. Only love could do that. My phone buzzed. A group text from the brothers. Meeting tomorrow to plan the joint foundation event? Sarah's bringing coffee. Veterans are handling logistics, and the kids want to design posters. I smiled, remembering Charles's words about karma and consequences. He'd been right. The greatest consequence wasn't punishment, but transformation. His sons had lost their inheritance only to gain something far more valuable: purpose, compassion, and a chance to continue their father's true legacy. We did it, my love. I touched his photo one last time. We really did it. Outside, I could hear Riker laughing with Sarah's kids, Harvey discussing veteran outreach plans, and Sterling explaining playground safety features to excited parents. The whispers that had once haunted my wedding day had transformed into something beautiful. The sound of lives being changed, one act of kindness at a time. And that, I realized, was the greatest love story of all.